Republican State Senator Brandon Creighton of Conroe. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. So as you know, the third special session is starting on Monday, and coming up, you are going to be, as Education Committee Chair, you're going to be authoring the next bill as it relates to school choice. And so can you walk us through, are there any changes to what you proposed since the regular session?
Yes, appreciate the time and great to be with you. Always appreciate the coverage on what we're working on in the Texas Senate, especially in the education space. So you're right. We're coming into the third called special session, and the governor has established education freedom and school choice as the top of the priority list. It remains an emergency item as he established, Governor Abbott established at the beginning of the session in January, and we still have unfinished business there. So I essentially the bones of the bill, it's very consistent with where we've been. I would say for some revisions that we have that will be published soon, the universal coverage is expanded somewhat, and the hold harmless provisions that we had earlier in the session that would have allowed some rural school districts to receive exactly the same funding per student, whether a student left with an ESA or not. That provision is coming out. So we have made some changes that will not only speak to eligibility but the number of kids served, students that will be served by the ESA should they choose to apply. The amount of funding is the same, and so we've dedicated about $500 million, just as we did prior to the effort, and the ESA itself is around $8,000.
Okay, so it's still 8,000 per child. And when you say universal, I know there were restrictions before. It could only be for students in public schools currently. If you were already in private school, you weren't eligible. And then as far as homeschool students weren't eligible. So when you talk about universal, does that mean everybody and anybody?
We're focusing on a priority set that will prioritize lower income and disability, special needs. And then from there, if there are any remaining applications that have not been served, and there are no other applications beyond lower income and special needs, then they would be considered. So again, there's scarcity of dollars, and there's only so many of these ESAs. In spite of what most of the education organizations are publishing, the narrative continues to be that this is just unbridled, and that every school, every child in public schools in Texas will participate in an exodus and leave the public schools vacant. I mean, that just couldn't be more untrue. So we've got limited dollars. We've got a limited number of ESAs. I think at the end of the day, it'll be in the 60,000 range, maybe 70,000 range, that out of 5.5 to 6 million students. And those that need them most will have the opportunity to apply. And that's been the case since January, and it's now October, and it's rarely published. So I just wanted to make that point clear.
And just for clarity's sake, are people who are students who are homeschooled, will they be eligible at all?
We've got a split in the homeschool community organizations on whether or not that they even want eligibility. So we're going to get into our hearings this week and hear from them, and make decisions on, for instance, whether or not curriculum that they use would be part of the eligibility or not. obviously the homeschool families have very valid concerns that they don't want what they see as working very well to be disrupted by policies from the state level that impose different guidelines on them. And I understand that concern, but for basic curriculum costs, $200-300, that is, you know, uh, assisting like other kids are getting assistance with their curriculum. I don't personally see a problem with that, but again, we don't have unanimity of sort of agreement among homeschool organizations that they even want to be in the bill.
And then what about private schools? Students who are already in private school, are they eligible under your legislation?
Yes, yes, they will be, but there will be specific criteria related to that, and we have to get through the hearings process to know where we're going to end up on that end.
But that is a change from your original bill, right?
The original bill as filed did not include private school kids. We started out with having been in a public school for at least a year. You're exactly correct. On the Senate floor, when I passed the bill, it was time to vote, and we voted the bill off the floor and sent it to the House. We did have an amendment on the bill that I put on it myself that did include private school students of a certain income level below the poverty level. I believe it was 200% of the poverty level that they then became eligible as a private school student, current student under the bill. But there was a limitation that no more than 10% of all of the ESAs made available through the legislation could be approved for that particular student.
And one thing that I wanted to ask you about is you said, unlike the previous legislation, there will be no hold harmless provisions now for rural school districts. And I'm wondering why that is, and is that going to make it more difficult to get this passed?
We're hoping it'll make it easier to get the bill passed. We just we put that provision in the bill, even though no other state in the country offers it, because we felt like it would be attractive to those members of the House that in rural districts that just did not prefer to vote for an education savings account. So when the signal was returned to the Senate that that was just not a provision that was interesting enough to cast a vote for school choice, we heard that loud and clear, and we decided this time around that it didn't rise to the level of importance enough to include it again.
Given the fact that the House has not passed this previously, I'm wondering, have you had discussions with House members? Is your bill going to be duplicated in the state House? In other words, is a House member going to basically introduce your legislation at the same time?
I think with this special session framework and where we're headed with just the differences and the policy preferences between the two chambers, I expect that the two chambers will come up with their own sort of customized preference for how this school choice legislation will look. And then I think respectively, both chambers will pass their version, and then we'll negotiate on it from there. I don't think there will be a House author for our version. I don't believe so, but it could happen. I'm not quite far enough along on that one.
And when I had spoken to the lieutenant governor months ago about this, um, even during the regular session, he said, "Look, if House members want to have carve outs for their districts, so be it." Where are you on that?
That's not really a favorite deal point of mine. I hope that and look, I mean, moms and dads all over Texas indicate through strong polling results that school choice is not only favorable to them, but a top priority for Texas to make sure that unfortunately, 31st in the nation to offer expanded school choice to parents. But I don't think that carving out any part of the state to deny those moms and dads the opportunity to have what other Texans have in other parts of the state is a good thing to do, especially with education and these specific needs that these students have. So I, for one, would rather the bill be statewide.
And how are these ESAs going to be funded? You talked about $500 million, but the money, at least if I remember correctly from the original legislation, the money would come out of general funds, not education funding per se. Is that right? And can you explain that?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's another narrative that I just really appreciate you asking the question and helping us, foster the truth, because there's been so much misinformation published, whether you know that's unfortunate or that was intentional. I'm not sure, but from the start, we have made sure that public schools have unprecedented new funding, that public school teachers have support and are lifted up like never before in across the board pay raises and bonuses that could pay those teachers up to $30,000 over their base salary. And then, separate from that, we have outside of public education funding and all that new money for public ed, we've got other priorities within the budget, whether it be the power grid or whether it be the border. We've got 500 million set aside that will not run through the Texas Education Agency. It will run through the comptroller in a program and a framework that will be established in the Texas comptroller's office for school choice and these education savings accounts. We've got the strongest anti-fraud provisions in the country in this legislation, and an excellent framework for accountability, and we will take it from there.
And you brought up teacher raises, and this is something that was not on the governor's specific call, but I know Senate Finance is meeting on Monday, and I'm wondering, are teacher raises going to be part of this school choice legislation that you are filing in the Senate?
Well, and I think you followed us all the way through the session. You did a great job, but the Senate always established these priorities: school finance, separate bill; teacher pay raises, separate bill; school choice, separate bill. All of those pieces of legislation went to the House separately, and the House chose not to advance them past the Senate, past the House floor. They took all of those bills, especially the teacher pay bill and the school choice bill, into different intervals of the process. The teacher pay bill went all the way to the floor, but those separate bills died. And in the remaining days of the legislative session, late in May, we only had one vehicle, an education bill left, House Bill 100, in the Senate that would effectively allow us to pour all of those issues into that one bill. And we sent that over because that's all we had left based on what the House did. And that bill was killed. So we're back to our original priorities that we've had all during the regular session this entire year since January, to include these issues separately.
So let me ask you this, because I'm wondering now. So if the school choice bill is just school choice and school choice only, I'm wondering then, what about teacher raises? Because this has been discussed. Everybody, whether it be Republicans in the Senate, Republicans in the House, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, everybody says that they're for teacher raises. So if that's not going to be part of your bill, how is that going to be brought up if it wasn't on the call?
Well, remember that school choice, as established by the governor, is an emergency item. So that emergency item, it's appropriate not only in the first 60 days of the legislative session, January and February, when we can't consider any other bill, it's very appropriate to make sure that those emergency items are considered and hopefully passed. And that's still not done yet. So here we are in October, and we are going to take up that emergency item first, and hopefully take care of business on getting that emergency item passed, so that we can move on to the other pressing issues that the state has to consider. And you're exactly right. School finance and teacher compensation, I would imagine, would be the very next bills, including school safety, would be the very next bills that we take up. And again, we've passed all of these bills, and the Senate has led on each of these issues, including teacher pay raises. But those pieces of legislation have been rejected, including my teacher bill of rights, that was a one of a kind bill of rights for teachers in the nation. And unfortunately, even though the Senate has passed those bills a few times this year, we'll have to come back again quickly after the emergency item is taken care of.
So you, if I hear you correctly, you believe that the governor will add teacher pay raises to the call once and if school choice passes?
I think after we take care of the emergency item, that the call will be expanded not only to school finance and teacher pay and school safety and other education issues. I think the call, I'm hoping that the call will be expanded to many other issues, because we have, unfinished business in other categories that are pressing needs. So yes, I believe that will be the case, and I would. I think the Senate, will begin, as you mentioned, working in hearings on those issues like teacher pay from the outset, even though the call is narrow, because we want to be ready in anticipation of the call expanding.
And two other questions, and I really appreciate your time, Senator. Just going back to the school funding, I know you said that this $500 million is going to be handled by the comptroller, but school districts say they're worried that they're still going to lose per pupil funding, if students actually go to private school. So how do you answer their concerns?
Well, if a student leaves a public school, let's say a student with autism and has just severe needs to develop coping skills so that they one day can get back to their public high school. That's an example that I'm working with a family on right now. If that were to be the case, the average student in Texas, through allotments that are afforded from the state, gets about the school district receives about $10,000 on average for that student. That's published by Raise Your Hand Texas. And for that $10,000, if a student leaves and to use an education savings account, there's a credit to the foundation school program of that $10,000. So there's a savings. And so we'll have to make decisions on how that available savings is redistributed back to the public schools. And one suggestion I have is to dedicate that to teacher pay raises in the future. So there will be ways that any credit or any savings to the foundation school program, that funds that we use to fund our public schools, can be used for the benefit of public schools. And we plan on offering those suggestions.
And why do you believe that this education savings accounts program that you are advocating for, why do you think this is good for students and schools?
I think it's good for families, right? I mean, our moms and dads around the state, they know much better than institutions or schools or government on what's best for the education needs for their kids. We've seen great successes in 30 other states that have expanded school choice. I think now we're at 10 states as of a couple of weeks ago that offer education savings accounts. And there is just no reason why Texas should let 30 other states in the country lead in education options for parents and for kids, as we sit on the sidelines and choose to ignore those successes on behalf of those students. So I really believe that certainly as a member from a Senate district that's had a school district taken over, Beaumont ISD, by TEA, and I know Houston ISD is going through that right now. That there are just needs, whether it be bullying or whether it be a fentanyl crisis or whether it be specific education needs for special needs students. There are some specific needs that 60 plus thousand kids out of almost 6 million deserve to have those options. And I believe that we'll get it done for Texas.
And how concerned are you about this seemingly intensifying animosity between the lieutenant governor and the speaker when it comes to the impact that it would have on passing legislation?
Well, the legislature and including leadership, it's made up of people, right? And people have tough days in this process to do what's right for Texas. We have strong emotions and strong beliefs on how to do best by our citizens and to be good stewards of tax money and to make sure that the decisions we make that we own when we leave the legislative process over the next year before we go back into session again, our papers are graded on that. And our papers are graded by Texas families with a red pen and a lot of scrutiny and it should be that way because we're there to do a good job. So yes, there are strong opinions and preferences and personalities, and at the end of the day, the public doesn't expect leaders from both chambers to rubber stamp everything. That's why civility of discourse and thought and a reasonable discussion on policy. That's why it ends up being sometimes a heated debate because we have to get through these details to get to results. And I think we will all work it out.
Republican State Senator Brandon Creighton of Conroe, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation. You're always great. Appreciate being with you on your show.
Yeah. Thank you so much.